Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Trevor with Maker Experiment, and in today's video, I'm going to be making a leather patch hat. Let's get into it. I've seen a lot of people making hats with the custom patches with their logo or some kind of design, and I decided that I wanted to try to make my own. In the past, I've always done the patches themselves as laser engraved patches that I would just ship to customers that would then attach them to the hats themselves. So I've never done the actual attachment myself. I've gotten some tips and tricks along the way from some people I know, some different adhesives that might work. I don't have a lot of these, and I'll go through a couple things that didn't work for me so that you're aware of those. But for this project, I'm going to be using a Richardson 112 hat. I got this one off of Amazon. I'll leave a link to everything I used in the description below. I've also got some thread to sew on the patch. I am going to sew this one, not just stick it with some kind of adhesive. I'm going to need the needles, the thread. You're going to also need some kind of temporary adhesive at least to hold it on, and then the leather. So I am using real leather, vegetable tan leather for this project, and I got all of the stuff for the leather side from District Leather Supply. I'll leave links to those as well. What I want to do with this project is I want to do a combination of UV printing and laser. I'm going to UV print my logo onto the patch and then laser cut out the entire patch part of it with a stitching pattern and everything. I will say that to do this properly, you will need flexible inks. I do not have those with me, like I don't have them for my machine. So I am using the rigid inks that I do have just as a test. I did do a couple prints. I'll show what happened with each of those and why some may not work very well with the rigid ink. But without further ado, let's jump into the design part of this. I'll show you what I intend to make. We'll print it out and then I'll go over some of the things that have worked and didn't work. Before I jump into the design side, however, I do want to mention my laser community. So I do run a laser community called Lasers Made Simple. It is lasersmadesimple.com/community is where you can find all the information. It is 100% free. The intent is to use that for networking, getting help with your problems. We can chat through the messenger on there as well. So if you're interested, I will leave a link to that in the description below. I also run a membership called lasersmadesimple.com/membership, and that is where I do group lives every month where I cover topics more in depth, teach you how to do things throughout the process. I help people figure out pricing, I help people figure out how to make a product, and help you run a laser business. So if you're interested in selling things you make, or you're interested in getting help with being able to make things in the first place, please give that a look. That's actually how I fund a lot of what I do on YouTube. It funds my channel, it helps me create these projects and bring out more content. If you'd like to see more of that, I will leave that in the description as well, so be sure to check that one out. Here's the design for the patch that I want to create. So I did this in two artboards. The first artboard is basically my template and laser cut border artboard. So that's where I have the red, which is my border that's going to be cut. The black line is my stitch pattern that I want to cut in order to be able to sew the patch on. And then my artboard 2 is my actual logo. So the reason I do this as two artboards is so when I go over to the UV printer, I will have a template that I can print onto the bed, which will be the red. And then I will have the colored one that I can print onto the actual leather patch. So the first thing that I do for this is I go to print. I'm going to send just page 1 over to the Epilog laser. So I did do this on my Fusion Edge. So I've already cut the patch, but for the settings on this, what I did is I go into my material settings, I go to vector. I do have a 1/8 inch leather, which is about 2 to 3 ounce leather. I import that, and then I do the same thing for the red. So because the stitch and the border are both being cut through, the settings are the same. I just send them over as different colors so that I can make sure that they look correct for me. So for this, the settings are going to be 75% speed, 100% power, and 50% frequency. So overall, in order to make the leather patch, it takes about 14 to 15 seconds just to cut the patch out. I am not laser engraving any of it. It's just cutting it. So I will show you the laser cutting process, and then we'll jump into the print side. Once the leather hat patch is made and cut out, you'll want to clean it up, which you'll want to use a nice leather cleaner, and I'll show that process in here in the video as well. And get that patch nice and clean for the printing process. Once the leather hat patch is clean, you'll want to apply an adhesion promoter. So I'm using the LogoJet adhesion promoter to help the ink actually stick to the leather better. Again, for this project, you really should use flexible ink, not rigid ink. If you use rigid ink, it can tend to crack, and I will show you an example of that. But keep that in mind as you're going through this process. If we jump over to the computer, here in my design, I have the red layer. The red layer is just my template. I'm going to print that onto the bed, and that's going to tell me where to place my laser cut piece. So once I print it on the bed, I go over to my color design. So this one, when I did my printer setup, I actually did a white underbase so that it's got a nice coat to print to. It's not gonna be like a see-through to the leather. So I print the white underbase. I'm then going to print the color layer on top of that. And then I printed a clear coat finish on top just to give it as much resistance to like weather or anything like that as I can. So I just go to there, go through, and I will print that to the patch. So I'm going to show you the printing process, and then we'll come back together and I'll show you a couple of things about the print. Now that the patch has been laser cut, I'm going to go ahead and clean it with some of my leather cleaner. Just going to put it on a shop cloth and gently rub it around the patch. This will get rid of any of the laser marks on the surface, which makes it easier to work with than trying to mask everything. Just like that. Once it's clean, I'm going to apply some adhesion promoter for the printing portion. Just going to take a little bit, just rub it around the leather of the patch and let that sit for a minute. And then once it's dry, I will go ahead and UV print it. I've already printed the template onto the printer bed, so I'm just going to put the patch into that spot on the sticky mat and press it down to make sure that it sticks to the bed, and then we'll go ahead and print it. Here are the two examples I printed. One is on blue leather. I did this just as a test because it's a thinner leather. And then I have a brown leather, which is typically what you see hat patches made of, and that is probably double the thickness of the blue. Now, something I want to show you, and this is why you want to use flexible inks. So on the blue, you can see that it printed really nice. If I bend it, it's okay. This one is not cracking. Now, the reason it's not cracking is because the leather is so thin. If I try to do the same with the brown and I start to bend it, you can see it kind of crack right here. This is why you want to use flexible inks. Now, I'm using the rigid because it's what I have on hand, and for what I'm doing, for my purposes, it's fine. I would not sell these to a customer with the rigid ink. I would definitely buy the flexible ink. But I wanted to let you know that if you have a UV printer and you are trying to print, flexible is the way to go. Okay, so I'm just going to take some of the adhesive and try to apply it to the patch. That's probably too much, but we'll spread it around here. Should probably put something under it, but just spread around the entire patch. Again, this is just intended to be a temporary hold while I sew the patch on. So I did pour a little too much there, but you get the idea. Put a nice thin layer on it. And you're going to want to let that sit for a minute or so that it can get kind of tacky. But I'll go ahead and clean this up from where I spilled over. But that's what you need to do, is just apply a small amount of adhesive, clean up after yourself because you're messy like me, and then just let it sit, and we'll come back to it in a second. All right, once it has sat for about 30 seconds to a minute, it'll be kind of tacky when you feel it. And even then, you can kind of see how I spilled glue on the front. I'll clean that up. But here's where you're going to try to position it. And you want it to be centered as much as possible. And I kind of want to be lower on the hat just because I want to reduce how much it can bend. But just enough to kind of hold it on to place. And then I'm going to take this over to my stitching pony and we'll sew it up. So this is my leather stitching pony. It's from Wing and Wave. I will try to leave a link to their Instagram. I don't know. I can't remember if they have a website. I ordered it through Instagram. Typically you want leather on these pieces, but because I'm not actually going to touch the leather itself, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to spend a second here to try to figure out how to position this the best. Most likely it'll be something like this, where I can still get the needle down in there. But I'm going to spend a second to figure out the best positioning, and I'll come back. All right, now that I got the hat in here, one of the first things I want to do is actually take a leatherworking awl. It's got a nice sharp point. What I'm going to do is poke it through the hat patch, through the hat itself, until it comes out of the other end. The reason for that is I want to do it now without a needle because it's going to be very hard to poke through with a needle. I'm going to go through every single one of these stitch holes, and then we'll come back and sew it. So I won't bore you. I will just go ahead and do that. That way you don't have to watch. Okay, I have all of it punched through. I will say that rigid ink, again, it will crack a little bit more when you do that process. Definitely use flexible ink. It will be in your favor. Now, I'm going to start stitching from the bottom and go around. I've already threaded my needle and thread. So what I'm going to do is just feed one of the needles through at the bottom and pull it through until it's about halfway. I probably have way more thread than I need, but that's okay. And then we're going to do the double stitch method I use in my wallets all the way around. So I will probably time lapse part of this, but let's start sewing it up. All right, one stitch down, way too many to go. This is where I realized that you want a sewing machine if you're going to be producing these in mass, because this would be miserable if you have to hand sew all of these on. So if you plan to sell leather hat patches sewn to hats, get a sewing machine. come on. There we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and time lapse the rest of this until we get near the end, and enjoy. Once I'm done sewing, I just snip the thread as close to the hat as I can on both sides. And then I use a thread burner to just burn the edge, or melt the edge of the thread so that it doesn't unravel. Next, I'm just going to rub some leather finish on top of this and it'll be done. I'm just going to put a little bit of leather cleaner on a shop towel and then just gently clean the surface of the leather patch. And there we go. I just finished sewing up the hat. This is what it turned out like. So it turned out nice and clean. Again, use flexible ink. There's a little bit of cracking, but I knew that that would happen. But it does look really nice. So overall, it does take a little bit of effort to get the patch sewn on if you're doing it by hand. Definitely recommend a sewing machine if you're going to be doing them as a product to sell. For a one-off, it's not so bad. You can get through it. There are better adhesives to use than what I used as well, which will help along with that process. But hopefully this video has been helpful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you know when I come out with new videos. Be sure to check out my Instagram @MakerExperiment where I share these type of things along the way. But I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'll see you in the next one.